If you would ask me what is the most important quality to be a successful writer, I would probably say knowing how to sell. Knowing how to sell your ideas. Selling every sentence so the reader would read them. Selling every chapter so that you will remember them. Selling the books so that the press will publish them and then sell a lot of copies. Selling, selling, selling. And if I want to find an author who I think is the best at selling, I would choose Robert Frost. Yes, the poet, the very, very famous poet and a very successful poet, the only man in history, the only human in history, who won 4 Pulitzer Prize for poetry in the United States. One of the most iconic, most successful poets there are. And he got to this position because he knows how to sell, how to structure a poem, how to title it, how to sell poetry books. He is the expert, the best there is at the field. And I believe if you study this and learn from his skill, you can also implement it in writing prose, in writing non-fiction, even in academic work. My name is Shai Dotan. I'm Associate Professor of International Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English and your research skills. Let's observe and see how Robert Frost sells poetry and sells books. We start from his first poetry book, A Boy's Will, a very mediocre book in my personal opinion. I read it carefully, I read all the poems there. I didn't find anything very exciting there. He was still honing his skills, learning his craft. When you go to his second book, we already find The Salesperson. North of Boston is the name of the book. The very first poem, Mending Wall, is by far the best poet he ever wrote until that point, the best poem in the book. Mending Wall is a poem that describes 2 farmers who are building a wall every year, mending the wall, fixing the wall between the 2 territories. The character, the protagonist, the one who explains it, says, there are things that do not love a wall. I think that the wall is not necessary. Why? It's necessary maybe if there are cows, if there are animals, but here we have just trees. There's no reason to build that. But he says that the neighbor would never go beyond his father's teaching that good fences make good neighbors. So because of some kind of a false belief or tradition, he is going to destroy the good friendshipness, the good neighborliness or friendship that could emerge when walls are taken down. So it's a very kind of cosmopolitical message. We need to love each other, we need to tear down walls and bring bridges. A very catchy argument, written in a beautiful way. It's a beautiful poem. I really recommend to read it. And the interesting thing that I want to focus your attention is that he puts that poem first in the book and gives all the emphasis to it. And in addition to that, which is even more brilliant trick, by the way, in some of the books this is not appearing, but I got it. I read it in several books, and in some of them you see the original idea that he had. He writes a footnote in Mending Wall referring to a poem in The Boy's Will. So the first poem of his second book, North of Boston, refers to his first book, which I said was rather mediocre. The connection is very minimal. So it's the same theme. I think it's about also building walls, etc. So he says, he kind of refers you to the idea. But what did he do? By writing the first poem, Mending Wall, in his second book, he's able to sell the book much more, because people usually just read the first poem. They decide if they want to buy the book. Great, they buy the second book. Now, the very, very first footnote in the book refers them to his first book, so they're going to buy this as well, and he's going to sell more books. So, brilliant way of selling. And when we get to his third book, his third book, Mountain Interval, he also opens it with the most powerful poem in the entire book. Some would say his best poem ever. This is the poem, The Road Not Taken, which many of you have heard about. In Israel, every child learns it at school. And this poem appears in the first page in italics also. So all the emphasis you can get to really sell those books. So at least in the terms of a kind of editing his work, prioritizing the poems, organizing them, Robert Frost was really a genius. He knew how to organize his ideas in a way that would really sell books in a very powerful way. Now, how did he know how to do that? Robert Frost grew up in a city, but spent many, many years working in a farm. He wasn't probably very successful. He tried to move from one farm to the other. He spent his morning writing, but this really didn't teach him that. He made a famous voyage to England, where he met some of the greatest men of letters of the time, such as Ezra Pound, who may have taught him quite a few tricks. But he was a very good student, so he knew how to really sell ideas in a very, very powerful way. So as far as titles, books, collections, editions go, he was a genius. You don't become an iconic poet just because you know how to sell poetry books or you know how to organize them. You need to also write many good poems, and especially after the first books, Frost did write a lot of very, very good poems. But even in these poems, I want to focus your attention on the lack of very, very substantial depth in ideas, as opposed to how brilliantly the poems are organized. So if we take a poem, The Road Not Taken, for example, it describes in theory a person that describes the past. He says, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and I looked at the roads and I saw that one had was a little bit more grassy and wanted wear, so I knew that it was less people that traveled there, even though they were almost the same. And then he took the one less traveled by, and then he says, I should be saying that with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and I chose the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. So this leaves the reader with some kind of a dilemma. Some of the language in the poem suggests that the roads are practically the same. So this means that that you choose a road and then you don't know where it's going to take you, and probably you will never be able to come back into it yourself. So we just randomize, basically. Another way to look at it is to say that you choose deliberately the road less traveled by, and this suggests, for example, the life of an artist who deliberately choose the life of a spirit which is chosen by less people, and that leads them in a particular way, again, non-retractable way. Is a very deep poem? I don't think so. I don't see that this dilemma is resolved. I don't see that he's hinting on any deep theory about human life. I just think that it's a very beautifully crafted poem that opens some questions, that has some basic insights, but not much more than that. And that's his most famous poem, and I know people try to understand it for many years, but it's possible that there's also not so much there in terms of additional intellectual depth. If you take another poem that I think one that is perhaps a little bit closer to Emily Dickinson, who I also reviewed, who is, in my perspective, the absolute opposite of him, because she has a theme that she goes on this theme, a theme of death, continuously all the time, more metaphors, more allegories, more interesting ideas, pushing through levels of sophistication. Robert Frost doesn't do that. When he speaks about that, he speaks about, for example, a poem that is called Stopping by the Woods in a snowy evening, and a man is stopping next to the woods, and snow, the horse doesn't understand what's going on. He eventually decides to go on to his original task, and he says, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So he speaks about some kind of level of commitment. It's easy to present the woods as potentially death, potentially heaven, potentially life that is not encumbered with any obligations. It's open for the reader to see, potentially nature, obviously. But again, I don't think that you need to dig deep into that. I mean, it's a beautifully crafted poem. It rhymes well. The metaphor is clear. The message is clear. You continue. You have tasks. You have your obligations, and you continue to do them. Again, I don't see any very deep philosophical thesis. It's just an idea, but is well crafted and very easily transportable towards a poem that is understandable and readable. Let's take another example. A very short poem. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and will suffice. Beautifully crafted, organized, rhymed, perfect. This is really a picture of perfection. What do we have here? A thesis that says that hate is more prominent when you are closing yourself in a silent, in a cold way, rather than exploding in the height of passion. Probably that's the best way to interpret it, but I don't see here any greater depth that would build a theory of human emotion and so on. There's not so much to do with it. I mean, yes, fire and ice, the allegory is absolutely clear, and he says one would be enough to destroy the earth, the other would be also enough, and that's perfectly fine. So another very well crafted poem that looks as if it's philosophical, but doesn't do much more. And I could give example after example. There's another nice poem called The Rose Family. It goes something like the rose is a rose and was always a rose, but now the theory goes that the apple is a rose and so is a plum, I suppose, or something like this. So you are a rose, of course, but you are always a rose. I don't fully quote the poem now. So you see, again, it's a great complimentary poem. For example, for a loved woman, no particular specific deep ideas that appear there. Just a well-crafted, well-organized poem that can be presented more as a compliment than as a deep love poem. I think one of the poems that I really like is a great gem because it speaks about something very, very simple in a very beautiful way, in a way that could look profound, but actually doesn't have a message beyond the mere beauty of a thing you are observing. And the poem is Nothing Gold Can Stay. So it goes something like this. Nature's first green is gold, the hardest hue to hold. So first green of a nature is gold, the beginning of the coloring in nature is gold, hardest hue to hold. The first leaf is a flower, but only so an hour. When leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sunk to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. So for me, this is a very simple poem about a father or a mother that sees the children, and children usually are born, if they are white color, usually they're born a little bit blonde, and then the color becomes darker. I was completely white when I was a child. Both of my kids are blonde. So that's the gold color that cannot stay. And you can try to write whole philosophical thesis about it, but it's just describing the most simplest of beauties. So a father or mother looks on the children when they are young and admiring the beauty of the blonde hair as children, and that's all. And you don't need to read much more into it. And my thesis, if you would accept it, is that in addition to being a great organizer, commercializer, organizer of books, of poems, Wilberforce simply knew how to sell individual poems. He knew how to sell individual couplets of rhymes. They were just very, very catchy and easy to read. Now, so why am I bothering you with all of this. My purpose is not to teach you about poetry. The purpose here is to make you better writers. And I want to try to encourage you to learn from Robert Frost this quality. As a writer, your task is to be simple, concise, and clear. If you write in ways that are easy for the reader to read, you will be better writers. You will be more successful, for sure, but also you will be better thinkers. Now, you may view what I said so far as an allegation against Frost that he's not very deep. And that's true. That's what I said. I don't think that his poems are of incredible philosophical depth. But I think that the poems are very valuable as beautiful things, as analysis of language, as analysis of simple pictures of life. And this is the level that he was aiming at. I don't believe that by trying to write simply, clearly, and concisely, you are losing depth. You're getting the highest depth that you can use on this topic with this skill set, with these ideas that you have. And that's why when I teach students, I try to tell them, don't try to appear profound. You're just becoming unclear. You are becoming less than you can be. You become the best author that you can be by being simple, concise, and clear as much as you can. This is what will allow your ideas to emerge. How far they will range, how deeply they will range, this I cannot guarantee. This depends. People have different interests, they have different fields, they have different thoughts. Everything is acceptable. But the point of the matter is that by trying to be simple, concise, and clear, selling your ideas, writing sentences that are easy to read, paragraphs that are easy to read, chapters that are easy to read, organize them in books and articles in a commercialized way, you will manage to succeed to the highest potential, the highest of the potential. And for me, a great teacher in this respect is Robert Frost. So I recommend to read his books. I recommend to find an anthology that also would give you a sense of the different books. So either read them separately or read in a very good anthology that would show you the years and would show you things like the footnote that appears after Mending Wall or things like this. And this would allow you to learn from his craft. So just like from Emily Dickinson, you will learn the music of a language because she is as a genius born to that. From Robert Frost, you will learn how to sell your work. And that's a very important skill to become a better writer.